As the shopkeep turns around, I pocket the priceless necklace.
You're just gonna steal it, Ted?
Yeah.
Not very heroic. Okay, what do you do next?
Wait, aren't you missing something? Don't I get inspiration?
For stealing a necklace? That's not very heroic.
But I'm a guild artisan. My flaw says that, I'll do anything to acquire, a priceless piece of art.
Ted, there are 5 other players in this game. You expect me to know what all their flaws and all their traits are?
So maybe we should discuss, does D&D 5e need another flaw system?
Welcome to Nerdarchy for Nerds, by Nerds. I'm Nerdarchy Dave, and as usual, I'm hanging out with this nerd.
Nerdarchy Ted.
Do you want your YouTube feed to be full of D&D videos? Then hit that subscribe button.
And if it's Nerdarchy videos you're after, you're going to want to make sure you hit that notification bell.
Before we get started, I want to thank our sponsor, D&D Beyond. It is a great database of all things official when it comes to 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, but you can do so much more over there, like build your characters as well as build your encounters when you're planning your sessions for your D&D game.
But as Dave says, we noticed other things that we were out there playing around. It's a great community. There's a lot of homebrew items, classes, feats, all things to, help expand your game if you've played all of the official stuff and you want to move beyond. So check out dndbeyond.com.
So with that, we were over there hanging out and kind of like we wanted to kind of maybe do a video on homebrew stuff, and we discovered something when we were looking at the feats. There's this like whole subsection of homebrew feats that aren't really feats. I would call them like anti-feats, right?
They're listed as flaws, so if you were to look at feats, you could look at, the category debuff. And that is where I wound up finding them. There's one particular user who makes a lot of them. And, not a slight in any way, shape, or form. We thought it was a cool idea. But the way it's supposed to be designed, so you would be able to take, this feat with your DM's permission. It's a flaw. It gives you a penalty. And then you would be able to, have a increased stat modifiers, beyond your starting threshold.
So it very much seemed like this particular individual, and others as well, were trying to come up with a flaw system to kind of tack on 5e, and they modeled it off of the feats, and the idea is, well, here's a feat, anyone can take at first level, and it fundamentally changes your character. I don't know if this is particularly the way to do it if you wanted to implement a flaw system or another flaw system into 5e, but like this sparked a conversation with us about the D&D flaw system, which the good thing about it is you take a flaw, mechanically it doesn't do anything to your character, it's a roleplay thing, but when you invoke that flaw, in theory you should probably be getting inspiration for it because some detriment comes up in the game due to it. But there's also problems with this system that we've run into in the game, and not only that, we just find most groups don't seem to use it, or they're not using it the way it's intended. The players might be role-playing those flaws. Generally, we find the DMs don't know they're role-playing those flaws, or even what the flaws are for the characters. That's not a slight against those dungeon masters. It's not a slight against those players. It's just that the way the system works, it's not very intuitive, and kind of like we were joking around with the fact that if you got a table of 5 players, memorizing all of their flaws and knowing them, I mean, even with a cheat sheet, remembering to see if this is affecting them or not when it comes to the flaws and even the other personality traits, it's a lot to put on the dungeon master. Yeah. So what we've seen in the games is inspiration is given out when the DM feels players have done something cool or funny, more so than when it invokes one of these traits.
We've been playing 5th edition since, even before all the books were out. We've enjoyed it. It is our favorite edition by far. But I think, that in and of itself, the flaw system is not working for our groups or any of the groups that I've actually been a part of. I've never had a DM, ask me at the start of a campaign or a start of a session, hey, what is your character's flaws? I tend to still use those charts or take things that are inspired by them. But we've even talked to DMs who are like, oh, I don't even read the player's handbook. I don't know anything about flaws. So it's like, whoa, that's, that's even, farther removed, from this scenario. So, it does beg the question of, does 5e need another way to have, this, I do something wrong or, I have this deficit, should I get some kind of reward for it?
So, we've played a lot of different role playing games over the years. I mean, we play more 5e than anything now. But the problem I've always seen with flaw systems, especially when it impacts your character mechanically by taking a flaw and usually giving you some kind of perk for taking it, like the offsets it is, players will min max and try and figure out all the different flaws they can take that actually never affect their character in order to get all the bonuses. Rarely have I seen a player go, all right, how can I optimize my role playing by taking these flaws? I'm not saying it doesn't happen or those players aren't out there. It's just I've seen much more the other way around than from the RP standpoint.
Yeah, here, let me take something that's, going to, affect my charisma when I don't talk to people, so that, I can increase my strength, so that every attack that I do, which is going to be, every time I swing my sword, is better. That's not a fair trade-off. But, while we were planning this video, you had brought up a system from another game that you felt was very apropos.
So yeah, Ted, Mutants and Masterminds is that game, but it didn't start off that way. I think they learned the lesson from going from second edition Mutants and Masterminds to third edition, right? So in the second edition, it's very much what we described. Take flaws, get benefits someplace else. Going from second edition to third edition, it was take flaw. The flaw comes up during the game, impacts your character narratively, and then when you receive that negative impact, you are then rewarded via their hero point system. So you get this, you get a benefit that you're going to be able to use later in the game because it came up. Again, that system is going to have the same problem of, either the DM has to track your flaws, or you have to bring it up and be like, hey, this is a problem because of this. So it comes back onto the player to be like, hey, I am role playing X and here's why. And we even discussed this when we were talking about this video. And the problem with that is it feels gamey and it breaks immersion kind of. If you have to role play a scene and be like, well, and here's why it's a negative impact.
And Doug brought this up as, playing to my flaw, only, a phrase goes into, your lead into, I'm going to do this or I'm going to say that. It does seem a little weird. It does seem a little gamey, but it is the easiest way to use the system as is and as intended without breaking too much immersion. But any amount of breaking immersion is breaking immersion.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we've seen the introduction of the X card and other safety tools.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, could you implement a similar thing where you've got, there's different personality traits. You have a card for each one, and you just role play and you hold up the card.
You're not trying to say that you want to institute an F card, do you?
Maybe. But yeah, maybe it's just like, oh, you're holding up the red card or, whatever color card. Or maybe they are lettered or whatever. So everyone knows that you're invoking your flaw, and the DM can decide if you invoked your flaw or a different personality trait, ideal bond, well enough for the dungeon master then to award you inspiration in that particular scene. I guess that would be less immersion breaking than saying it.
Right.
It'd be like a compromise, I guess.
So, that's definitely a way to do it so that, auditorially, everyone stays within the game. But we all are, we're not, at least, in the tables that I'm in, I know there are games that fully get in costume, so they've even got the next level of immersion, but our tables, we don't tend to do that. So you do have the visual aspect of, okay, well, I'm going to do this. Meanwhile, I'm, narrating and describing what I'm doing. I kind of like that aspect. And it does then allow everyone to be like, oh, he's doing this weird, choice, but and here's why. So that is a cool, visual cue to help everyone at the table understand why it's going on. And then, perhaps the DM can decide, what is that worth? What is the deficit to the individual, to the party, versus, what kind of reward or story reward is going to go along with it.
But I'm still kind of curious to see if people do really want a different kind of flaw system that is like, when I'm building my character, here are things that I can fiddle with and tweak. I do feel like 5e is modular enough to do a flaw perk system that has nothing to do with inspiration, that could change your character. but I really don't know a good way to do it that's not going to, invoke those pitfalls we described earlier. Because I yet to see the gamers, like, especially when you have, the optimizers and the power gamers at your table, they're going to see that and their eyes are going to light up. And it's like going to be a kid in a candy store and they're going to like want to figure out how they can break the game.
That any system that is going to allow, those kinds of ups and downs, you're always going to have those players who lean towards that. And there is totally a side of my brain that adores and loves looking at all of that kind of stuff. I feel I've evolved as a role player. That it's not something that I'm like, oh my god, I have to have, or I really need it. But it is something that if it is part of the rule set and the DM wants to use it, it is something I'm going to look at. And that doesn't, in my opinion, stop me from being a good role player or allowing me to immerse myself in the game. But I like to have mechanically advantageous characters because, let's face it, when the dice are your enemy, you can have sucky nights. And, you of all people are well aware of that.
And then some. And again, too, every table is different. You might be a table of optimizers and power games, and that's what you enjoy about the game. So that kind of system would be perfect for that table. What's good for one table is bad for another, and vice versa. That's the great thing about this hobby is we can just enjoy the game in different ways.
Absolutely. So I guess it comes down to this question. Do you feel out there that, D&D needs this kind of system? Let us know down in the comments below.
If you enjoyed this D&D discussion, we have another D&D discussion you might enjoy. And it's kind of a little bit of a mini game in itself, and it is Dungeon Master Have You Ever? Cards up here, click it.
Want a great way to support Nerdarchy and get monthly content all at the same time? You can check us out on Patreon, where we make 5e products for players and DMs alike every month.
But that's not all. We do monthly giveaways that our patrons are automatically entered, weekly patron-only live chats, and more.
So until next time,
stay
stay nerdy.